Now it's time for our debate. I believe that you have had many questions over the course of this discussion. Please only speak into the microphone when the microphone reaches you, and introduce yourself, say who you are, where you're from, and let's start with the questions. Before you make up your mind, we do have a question in the back. And please stay on topic. Yes, we usually do. I'm Cícha from České Budějovice. I like the final words of the last speaker, which is that it's as if the last adult left the room. Because what we hear from one side and the other side and the third side, all the insults, I think they clearly show you the situation. Look at what happened in Charlie Hebdo. That was a very typical situation from the other side, but insulting the other party is probably the norm now. Do we have any comments on that? Charlie Hebdo, the cartoon of Prophet Muhammad, that of course there were many discussions about that. I did a tour of the media back then, so I had to talk about that a lot. What do you think about cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and generally satire about religious phenomena?
Well, I'll go ahead first. This tricky question. Well, I think Pope Francis said that there is no right to offend anyone just by itself, because you want an intention you want to offend. Well, that's the first thing. The second thing is that you can make a statement or give an opinion that as a secondary effect it can provoke an offense to someone. That's different, I think. That's the first element, yes, I'm not going to be any conclusion, I'll just give it some food for thought. The second element is that imagine a pope in a caricature. What would be the reaction? So I think that we have to have common standards for all. Why some yes, why others no? I think that that's the second reflection, standards for all. I would not encourage anyone to do it for sure. I would encourage everyone to be respectful to the rest of people. But there are people who are not respectful, or who think otherwise, or who are more straightforward. So the question is, which is the room that we give for them? In Denmark, there was a change in the criminal code regarding precisely this topic of the treatment of religious texts. Of course, they cannot say Quran, but the whole debate was precise about that, because the law, as you may know very well, has to give general wording and not singling out a particular religion. The question is, do we want a society in which a person go to jail 3, 4, 5 years for burning a book that is considered sacred by someone? Do we want that? Because the question is not the particular treatment, the question is what type of society we want. Because this is an issue, but there are many other issues, and if you just compose and give this piece, that piece, you change completely the human rights atmosphere. You were talking about the climate. Human rights climate, not climate change. I'm talking about the human rights climate, you know. The climate on human rights is changing to the worst direction, I could say, you know. But I don't want to give any conclusion on that, but I think that we have to preserve a space even for those who go on a little beyond, who are not respectful, but have the right to do so. For example, do I have the right to shout to a person? It's not respectful, but it goes more. It's not a moral issue. It's not a legal issue. It's a matter of social courtesy. So we have to make distinction between morality, law, religion, and courtesy. And this is, I mean, we cannot put all together in the law and much less in criminal law. The criminal law is the last resort, the very last resort. The other thought is that, of course, you have to be prudent. Any action, you have to foresee the consequences. I had a discussion with a theologian, Muslim theologian from, I think it was Indonesia, years ago. And we were talking about, well, what will happen if you say this and there is a violent reaction? For example, if you remember the words of Benedict XVI that made a quotation of a discussion between emperor, Byzantine emperor, and I think it was a Muslim imam or leader. It provoked even resolution of the Parliament of Pakistan, condemning the Pope. Everybody was demanding the Pope to apologize. For what? For a quotation in a Regensburg lecture at the university. Do you have to? I'm sorry. That's a university. That's our lifestyle. We can say these things at the university with arguments and so on, but we can say that, whether you like it or not. And you can do the same in the opposite direction. I myself am Catholic. The Catholic Church, priest, bishop, pope have been for years right now in every single front page concerning sexual abuse and so on. It's fine. It's fine if it's proportional and it's done the same with the rest. But it's not like that. So I admit that there should be criticism against the church, if it's necessary, against the priest, bishop, or whoever, of myself even. But the same parameter for all. And this is what we do not find here.
Výborně, děkujeme. Další otázky?
Thank you. More questions?
Dobré odpoledne, Václav Pláteník, poslanec.
Good afternoon, Václav Pláteník, Member of Parliament. You all started by saying that it is high time to discuss these issues and that things are changing very quickly. And my question is, what has changed that quickly? We saw the statistics, we saw the figures, that there are more and more attacks. But why is that? Over the past 10 years in Europe or in the West, many things have changed, but the changes are not endless. We can talk about the development of social platforms, migration, the development of internet, but the list of things that have changed is not endless. So what does the rise in attacks correlate with? It's probably a question to Martin Kugler.
So mainly the reasons we try to figure out or to detect are in the field of motivation, and the problem is that there's not always a scientific proof for the different countries we see in Europe, but there's generally a growing connection between vandalism and so violence against buildings, religious buildings of worship, and violence against persons. And it's obviously a psychological truth, or you can ask psychological experts of psychology, that if a person is ready to enter a church and to burn a Bible on the altar or to devastate paintings of saints or cutting the head of Jesus Christ on a crucifix, then the next step to attack a priest is not so far normally. No? So there is a growing reluctance to respect freedom of religions of other persons. This is one fact. The other fact is that as the awareness is so small, as media are so weak in covering these issues. Yeah? I told you about this Syrian Christian from Lyon who was killed. There was hardly any article outside of France. Yeah? So people don't know Päivi Räsänen, the Finnish politician's case, though she is in court for 6 years and she was a Minister of Interior Affairs. Even politicians, I ask young politicians from Scandinavia, they even don't know it. Yeah? So this is a combination of different phenomena, which then in France, for instance, where you have both radical secularism as a tradition, laïcité, a strong leftist elite, and also a strong Muslim immigration, and then altogether brings the figures increasing, makes it increasing. So this is my explanation. But you know, there's different elements, and every country has its own maybe special concerns. Yeah.
Já mám k tomu možná ještě doplňující otázku.
Let me comment. And I may also ask a question.
Additional question. Není to trošku i tak, že díky těm antisemitským útokům,
Do you think that
mediálně,
thanks to the anti-Semitic attacks,
z velké části, tak jestli nestoupá
or due to the
jakási
anti-Semitic
citlivost, zdravá
attacks,
citlivost
also in the
na
Czech
to, že
Republic,
se
people
začíná
are getting
mluvit o
more
těch
sensitive to this type of issues, and as a result, we discuss these issues more and more.
Unfortunately, I don't speak Czech, and I don't follow the Czech press normally, though I maybe should. I don't know exactly details, yeah, but what I know is that the Czech public opinion is often a little bit more independent from the European mainstream than other countries.
completely independent, actually.
Yeah, so this might have also challenges, but in this regard is a good thing, because if you see that what happened in Germany last year when the public debate on alleged Christian missionaries in the world of sports or art was really, in my opinion, absolutely exaggerating. Yeah? And on the other hand, they don't talk about hate crimes against Christians or Jews in the university. Yeah? I mean, the fact that manifestations in favor of Palestine were in Vienna every Saturday, the police did not do anything against the violence, not violence, but the aggressive atmosphere. But when we Christians want to do a Red Wednesday manifestation in the city of Vienna with candles, then it's a huge problem, because it could affect the shopping tourists in the Kärntnerstraße and so on. Yeah? So this is just not because the police is anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. This is just because they are afraid of the Palestinians, and the left cultural elite, so the media, basically, not all of them, but are reluctant to address this problem. And they would not support us if we, as I say us, yeah, as Christians say, okay, we need a manifestation for persecuted Christians every Saturday in the inner city of Vienna. Yeah? There's absolutely unbalanced discussion.
No, Hanna Weiler chtěla reagovat.
Yeah, I would love to contribute to this question. I think it's very legitimate to say the Czech Republic is a very special country when it comes to anti-Semitism and showing support for Jewish life. There's one thing that I will never forget: when the 7th of October happened and the Jewish communities and Jewish organizations worldwide had to increase their security measures up to an unbelievable amount of more and more security. The youth events that were scheduled until the end of the year of 2023, the vast majority of them happened here in Prague, in the Czech Republic, because I think it's fair to say that it's one of the last European cities where you can freely, and I mean no country is completely free of anti-Semitism, that is clear, but it's one of the last European countries and European capitals where you can freely walk with a kippah on your head, with visible Jewish symbols, without being afraid of physical violence. For me, who has lived in the past years in Paris, Berlin, and Brussels, this is a reality that is positively shocking me every time, and I think it's a really, it's really shows how bad the situation is, that Jewish people who come to Prague, who are not from here, feel so shocked about the fact that finally they don't have to hide that they are Jewish and they can walk through the streets freely. So this really has to be said. But when it comes to the question of does the situation and the discourse around anti-Semitism and the endless anti-Semitic attacks actually influence the awareness of religious persecution and the rights of religious communities in Europe in general, then unfortunately I have to be more pessimistic on that and have to say it doesn't. I think what the discourse that we have observed in Europe for the past years actually did is making people, the evaluation of this whole process is that the situation is getting worse and worse. People don't want to speak about the topic anymore because they don't understand that it's not just some community that they have nothing to do with and that they don't have to care about. They don't understand that actually it's about European society. societies, and that anti-Semitism is always a marker for the state of a democracy, and that it might start with the Jewish community, but then the Christians follow, and then other communities follow, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, I think that the progress is one that we have to look at with some sort of pessimism. The situation is not getting better, it's getting worse. The situation of anti-Semitism has not contributed to a better Europe. It has not contributed to a better way of speaking about religious freedom. It has made the situation worse because, and I do think, and correct me if you see that differently, and I do think that that is also a very important factor when we look into the rise of hate crimes against Christians. We live in societies that are more and more and more polarized, where a discourse is more and more impossible. We are in a university building. University buildings in Europe have become a symbol of places where it's almost impossible to have a discourse based on facts. We also live in a post-factual time where there are a lot of people, especially young people, unfortunately, who don't believe in facts anymore, no matter what the facts are that you present to them. But in spaces that are meant to be spaces of critical debate and so on, such as especially universities, it has become very, very, very difficult to have these critical debates without an escalation, and it's really a symbol of how divided our societies have become. And it's a consequence of many things, but also a consequence of the toxic discourse around anti-Semitism and the state of the Jewish community that we have seen over the past 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
A quick comment. I think that one of the best analyses of the situation in Europe was brought by Pope Benedict XVI. He said, we have a problem of moral relativism. But I think that the moral relativism is also epistemological relativism. So the question is that there are no facts, but narratives is a matter of epistemology. And this is linked, because epistemology, knowledge, and morality, action, are strictly linked. This is one comment. There was a famous member of the Federal Constitutional Court, a jurist called Böckenförde. He said, democracy is based in principles that democracy cannot hold by itself. So there is something below democracy. And that's basically not the culture, but the moral and anthropological understanding of society. The point is that right now, we are not in a cultural diversity or change. We are in a moral and above all an anthropological change. For example, some days ago, there was a very prominent, I think that it will be one of the key issues in some areas to comment. There was a decision of the EU Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice, concerning same-sex marriage, saying if one country issues public documents recognizing same-sex marriage of a couple, it should be recognized by all the 27 member states. This is, for me, a shift in European values. There are a lot of consequences, we can talk about that. But the question of marriage and family is the base of the society. And this is Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the family is the cell of a society. There is a Brussels-based Catholic-inspired organization working on family that recently has received a letter from the European Commission saying, because they were asking for grants, for money, for funding, like many other NGOs. And they, for the first time, they never got anything. But for the first time, they received a letter saying, look, we have some concerns about your understanding of non-discrimination. This was the letter. So does it mean that a Catholic organization is not qualified to get funding because it has a specific doctrine on the reality of man, woman, of what is non-discrimination, what is marriage or family? Is it like that? I think that this is a substantial civilizational issue. It's not just a matter of law.
Je dobré slyšet, že alespoň v něčem Česká republika je na tom dobře.
It is good to hear that at least in some aspects the Czech Republic is in a good position.
Děkuji. Jana Jochová, Aliance.
My name is Jana Jochová from the Alliance for Family.
Thank you very much for just being said, because I defend marriage based as a relationship of a man and a woman. I was at a different conference today, which was about education in the Czech Republic. And it was led by groups that want to say other things than that marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman. So I was at that conference, I was called an aggressor, even though I did not speak, I just sat there. Just indirectly, not directly, but I think the problem is that we, as a democracy, gave too much of a floor to certain minorities, and then they turned this against us, and against Christian values, and Jewish values, perhaps. I don't know if there are some minorities that are too privileged, perhaps, and perhaps have too much of an impact on the education of our children. That's a side note, maybe a question. What do you think about that? Thank you. It certainly is a good question. So we have no, you're not an aggressor, I know you. You're not an aggressor, not at this conference, certainly. But the question is, and this also deals with political correctness. When I used to be in the media, I had to talk about that and deal with that all the time, because political correctness was originally a good idea. Let's give a voice to the smallest groups in society, but it ended up as self-censorship. What do you think? Do some of these minorities perhaps have too strong a voice in the media?
I talked about the blindness, which I think every period of history has this maybe this dark side. You remember the blindness of the English elites in the 18th century regarding slavery and slave trades. And it was a country which was kind of considering itself as a tolerant, liberal country, a parliament, two parties, and so on. And it was Christian, but it was outrageous how they dealt with the problem of slavery and the trade. Yeah? So abolition was a long fight of a couple of Christians, William Wilberforce, etc. So, and I'm not talking about the 20th century, anti-Semitism, etc. So blindness is a fact, and I think the vocation or the calling of Christians or people who are more kind of open to the Judeo-Christian heritage of Europe, to the basic roots of Europe, our calling would be to show this blindness. Or these blindnesses, and I think the minority thing is a typical blindness. It's confusing, protecting a minority, and accepting and performing and promoting the minority's identity position as mainstream, as a role model, as positive, as an element of fulfilling life. Yeah? This is new in history. Yeah? We were proud maybe 100 years ago that we finally, step by step, respected minorities, and now it becomes a culture who is self-victimizing, victimizing. So the more groups of victims you are a member of, the better. Yeah? So if you are, as my friend in Germany, a young lady with African roots, if she is female and immigrant, it's an advantage. But unfortunately, she's also Christian and a conservative. So she makes jokes about this. Yeah. So it would be much better if she would also be lesbian and left and not Christian. Yeah. So the more the better, and the more victims and the more minorities the better. So this is a misunderstanding of protection and of tolerance. And the last thing we spoke about is spirit of silence. I think if you, Mrs. Juchova, I think, if you take the floor in such a conference, this is a very great job, because then 10 other people would also feel encouraged maybe to take the floor, because they are knowing now that she or he is not the only one who holds this position. But if you keep silent, then nobody breaks this silence, and it's becoming a problem. No? It's the last adult is leaving the room.
Děkujeme. Dostali jsme signál, že ještě
Thank you. We still have time for one question, perhaps. But maybe Hannah and José Luis want to say something.
Thank you very much. I would also really like to comment on this question. I do believe there's also a general misunderstanding, and I also understand that my opinion might differ from many people in this room when it comes to this question. I think we have to be very careful when it comes to our language. Calling specific minorities who also experience, and that's the reality, and there are clear numbers about how many people who are part of the LGBTQ community, when they walk through the streets holding hands, how many times they will be harassed, they are not privileged. I would not call belonging to a minority that is affected by hatred from the society being a privilege. And I'm saying this from a Jewish perspective, from a perspective of a community and an organization that has been faced with a lot of problems of anti-Semitism in progressive spaces, in LGBTQ spaces, in feminist organizations, in parts of the Muslim community. All those problems exist and they have to be addressed. But I think that we should not stop ourselves from thinking or being able to think in both directions. The fact that people with different backgrounds, with different sexual orientation, different identities, that we live in a continent where all those different people can speak up and participate in a public discourse, that should be seen by us as a good thing, that we are a diverse society. The question is how we deal with the diversity, and the question is where we stop. And where we call communities, even though we speak about communities who are persecuted themselves, where we call them out for also the problems that they bring on the table. In the case of the Jewish Student Union of Europe, it's anti-Semitism. We know there's a lot of anti-Semitism in progressive spaces and in spaces that pretend to stand up for human rights. And it's not the case for many of them. But I think this way of thinking in both directions, that the goal is still to have people having a platform, but also being able to accept different positions, being able to be in a constructive discourse and not a discourse where you shut down the person on the other side simply because they have a different political belief than you.
Výborně, děkujeme.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can turn into being the aggressor. We have to remember that the fact that somebody has been a victim does not prevent that that very same group or person can become an aggressor, as a prostitute who was a victim can become the madame. We have seen that cases. The other thing is, of course, speech is speech. We have to give ground for anyone to speak. I have no problem with that. The question is, who is ruling the public policy? I tell you one example. I have 4 children, 3 daughters. They 3 go to a Catholic school. At a certain point, my neighbor tells me, "Do you know what your daughter, 10, 11 years old, is telling?" So I don't know what. That there was a workshop in the school in which somebody that the parents didn't know went there and said, now we're going to make a kind of example of how the principle of equality should run. Now, the female girls are going to change the clothes with the boys in a Catholic school in Brussels. I mean, you can speak about what you want, but I don't want my children to be educated in that way by somebody that is unknown, or at least to tell me that it will happen, I will object. The question is that, now, for example, the EU has passed the equality proposal. In that proposal, if my boy, I don't know, 10 years old, says, well, I feel that I want to change my sex, and I oppose or I advise, I can go to prison. I, as a father, can go to prison, and I will be lived up to 5 years, according to the Spanish law proposal, up to 5 years of parental responsibility. So, speak up, but don't touch my children.
Ano, je to otevřená otázka.
This is an open question, certainly. The final question, please. We still have, the organizers tell me that we have room for one more. So, do we have the microphone? Hello, Monika Hašková. I'm a journalist from Prague. Thank you very much for this conference. Thank you for the contributions. Thank you to all the panelists. I have this worry. I come here every year, and I think that the problem is that we're closing ourselves in these echo chambers. I think it's important for us to get out of this, the direction of the European Union, because I don't think the European Union is going in the right direction. So we should do two things. Call a spade, that's one thing, and have respect. To have respect, but also to not be afraid to say how things are, because believe me, every time I'm here and go home from this, what I would call a bubble, I reach people, and when I tell them what I heard here, they will say, I'm making things up. This is not true. And it's not true because they haven't heard about it in the media. I think it's very important for all these contributions to be spread widely in society through the media, because they should be the watchdogs of democracy. And in the media, this is rarely discussed, or it's strangely swept under the rug, or it's not called what it is. So let's say, what are the European values? Is it democracy? Is it freedom of speech? So why are we here? It seems to not be working. If these are the values, they should be working, and we should not be worried about anything, a student or anybody else. But if this is not happening, then clearly the European values must be something different. We keep talking about values, but what are they? So please, can we spread this to everyone so that we don't see the situation that there are two groups of people. The people who know, who've been watching the trends, but these are completely outside the other group, which doesn't know anything and doesn't want to know. And I'm worried it will be worse and worse. I was in Vienna at an introduction of Christian Klaas' book. A teacher wrote yet another book where they were teaching about the Holocaust. I'm almost at the end of my question. So do we have people from the media here? And do you contact the media? Because they are stronger than I am. Well, that's a very important point hiding in this, which is how to get all these issues into the media. And this is a serious matter. And I assume you deal with that.
Absolutely agreeing that the media play a key role, and many problems could be healed, or at least get better and better when we have good journalists. My organization considers itself as a research documentation center, which therefore is taken serious by the media. We are not seen as advocates or as lobbyists. We are seen as experts. This is the reason why the OSCE, since about 10 years, takes the phenomenon of anti-Christian hate crimes even serious. Before they didn't. There was a representante, or they say that, a high officer in the OSCE for combating anti-Semitism and one for Islamophobia, but there was nothing about Christians. So this is a step, but you need patience. Yeah? This is step by step. Yeah? And we need also the advocates, of course. I don't criticize the lobbyists. We need them. Yeah? But if you are working hard and be really precise with the facts and not just bringing opinions, yeah? You spoke about the post-factual time, yeah? So we have to also to address the relativism. I mean, this is every parent, every mother, father, every teacher, every friend in a circle, in a peer group can address this problem of relativism, which is one of the biggest and most stupid positions we have, yeah? Because the mere sentence, there is no such a thing as a truth, it demands to be true, no? So I think this is we need patience, and in any situations, see the moment to discover the blindness and to try to remove it.
Tak, výborně.
Excellent. Do we have anything else? If you don't want to.
I was researching about liberal bias in journalism. In Spain, up to 80% of journalists are liberal. We have followed now the current case of the BBC, the highest standard, universal standard of good journalism, which is faking videos, which is biasing, the conflict in Gaza. So this is what I follow very much the issue of Nigeria since years. Every time that there is a big statement on what is going on in Nigeria, the bishop that was witnessed in the US, for example, or when there was a response of a bishop from Nigeria to the statement of the president of Ireland saying climate change, blah, 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 all media, Deutsche Welle, Le Monde, Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung, El País, it seems that this is orchestrated. The day after, all of them use the same words. So if I'm an observer and a spectator of a fire, if a fire starts in different positions at the same time, it's not accidental. It's provoked. So for me, journalism has become just, sorry to say this, but a kind of slavery. I'm sorry for those who work for this media because they have no freedom. You have the alternative to be free inside or to be free outside. You know? But you really have no freedom to choose. So this is just a comment about how even the schools of journalism are extremely important because people have to discover that the truth exists.
Tak přátelé, s krvácejícím srdcem.
Dear friends, with a bleeding heart, I have to conclude this part, this panel. Don't give up. We will have more discussions to follow. But now we'll take a 10-minute break. Yes.